The title of the message is Strength in the Storm. Strength in the Storm. If you've ever done some travel to a place that gets hit by severe storms like hurricanes, you'll notice that some things in those places are different. They're built different. They're built in ways that can withstand a bit more. And my mom, she happens to live in Florida that gets hit by hurricanes from time to time. And so just walking around her house, I notice some different things that are different than they are here in Oregon. First is, you'll notice that the houses, they're built with cinder block. Many of them have stucco on them. You will also notice as you're going around a house on the windows that many of the windows will have these little pins sticking out all the way around the window. And you go, what is that all about? Well, the reason for that is because when a storm is a-coming, they have to put these things called shutters on the windows so that it can block and withstand flying objects in the middle of a storm. Not only that, now they have upgraded and newer homes have what's called hurricane windows. They're not hurricane proof, but they're hurricane resistant. I actually have a picture of how these are built, these windows. So like on the left, that would be like a good Oregon, vinyl double pane window. There on the right, you will see a laminated layer. You see that front layer? It is thicker than the back layer. There's a laminated layer in there that when something flies in, it holds it together. It's this piece of laminate so that when it shatters, it kind of sticks and holds everything together so that it can't go through, or in theory, wouldn't. The next thing that you would notice when you're going around is front doors are a bit different. Here's a picture of a front door. So like on the left side, that'd be a good Oregon door, opens inside, inwardly to the house. Well, in Florida, many of the homes open out. The doors open out because when the winds come, that way it won't blow the door into the house. The door will hold up. That there actually happens to be a hurricane door. It's made of steel, so it's more robust, it's thicker, it's got a stronger frame. The next thing you would notice, or I notice when I go to my mom's house, is when I go into the garage, I feel like I'm in Fort Knox. Here's why. The garage door looks like that on the right. You see all that heavy steel, it's going crossways. Well, that is a Florida garage door. On the left there, that's an Oregon garage door. You just keep it simple. Put the foam in there, a little insulation. You are good to go. And the reason why they do all of these things is because when a hurricane or a storm comes, they want to be ready. They want to be ready. And so there's some things that they can do in order to ready their dwelling for that. Now, some years they may not even get a hurricane. Some years there may not be a storm, but when one comes, they want to be ready. One famous storm is from 2018. It's in Mexico Beach, Florida, and it was built with being stronger than the storm in mind. They built it. So normal code in Florida is you want your house to be able to withstand 120 mile per hour object flying at your house. This house was built with the big one in mind, and they built it to withstand 250 mile an hour winds. And so they built this house. It was going to be on the beach, and then Hurricane Michael hit in 2018. And let me just show you what that neighborhood looked like. That home, it's interesting also that home protected the home that's behind it. But you see all of that devastation that took place in Mexico Beach, Florida. And what happened after that storm was these researchers and home builders began to study that home. What did they do in that home that was different? What were the different things they did to make their home more storm ready than the other storms? And from that home, they began to develop additional code to say, oh, this would be a good thing to do. Why would they do that? Because storms come. It may not come every year, but what they know is that storms do come. And the title of the message this morning is Strength in the Storm. I'm not going to encourage you to go buy one of those Florida garage doors or anything of the sort, because when I talk about storms this morning, primarily, I'm going to be talking metaphorically. If you're new to church or you're new to the Christian community, we love our metaphors. Worship was filled with them. The mountains, the waves, the wind, the things that come upon us. The wind is strong and the water's deep, one song that we sing. We're not necessarily talking about deep water, though it could be. We're talking metaphorically about the valleys that we go through, the mountains that we face in our lives. We understand, just like the builders of that home in Mexico Beach, storms come. And those storms are the difficulties, the tragedies, the trials, the things that we go through that are overwhelming, that test us at the core. And my encouragement is strength in the storm. No, yes, maybe the physical storm, but the hardships, the difficulties, the crisis, the tragedy. Jesus used the storm as a metaphor as well. In Matthew chapter 7, he talks about two homes and two builders. One home built by one stood tall after the storm. The other one fell in the storm. It was blown away. He talks about those builders and he says, the one who built the home on the rock is like the one who hears my words and puts them into practice. But the one who built the home on the sand, that home that was blown away, that's like the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice. One stood tall, the other suffered a fall. And Jesus says it was a great fall. Storms come. Famous quote from long ago. You're either going through a storm, you've just been through a storm, or you see a storm on the horizon. We understand this. We don't like this. We don't enjoy this. Maybe even today you're like, oh, he's talking about the storm. I don't even want to hear about the storm. I don't even like the idea of it. Well, neither do I. But the reality is that storms come. And so as we look at Paul, and we look at Paul the apostle and the storm that he went through, what we are going to do is glean some insights into our own lives of a real storm that he went through, and then metaphorically apply it to our lives. What can we do when the storm does come? It's interesting, storms. Storms are very famous. Some of the most famous scriptures center around a storm. Jesus walking on the water in the storm. Jesus' disciples in a boat in the storm. And Jesus says, peace be still. And we love it. We love the scriptures where there's great difficulty beyond what God's people can do on their own. And the Lord provides and he does what only he can do. And he makes a way where there is no way. And we cling to these storm stories. Any movie maker would tell you that storms sell. Just a brief search on the internet. Movies with the title Storm, Perfect Storm, Into the Storm, Polar Storm, Storm Seekers, Final Storm, Storm Cell, The Ice Storm, After the Storm. I mean, they know something that people are interested in studying the storm. What happened in the storm, these real life stories, because they do happen. And this text here, Acts 27, believe it or not, is some scriptures that are some people's very favorite, because they see Paul weather the storm and they glean insights and understandings into their own life. It's Paul's last trip on record. Acts 27. He's going to board a ship, then another ship, and he's on his way to Rome. And this ship endures the worst recorded storm of Paul's life. It's a storm, actually, in fact, that many have studied. They've learned a lot about storms and also ships from antiquity. Paul faces a literal storm. But from the storm story in Acts 27, insights come to you and me. I want to start in Acts 26 because that gives us some of the backstory of what was happening. We know from Acts chapter 19, and we went through this, that was the first place where Paul said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem and then I must go to Rome. So he had this desire in his heart that he was going to go to Jerusalem, then he was going to go to Rome. And then in Acts 23, the Lord comes to Paul in a moment of great difficulty, and he says, Paul, take courage, because just as you have spoken about me in Jerusalem, you must also speak of me in Rome. So if Paul had any questions about whether Rome was just some nice idea, no, now the Lord confirmed it. You must go to Rome. Paul would go from Jerusalem, false accusations. He would go to Caesarea, which was where most of the Roman government, the seat of Roman government in that area. He would stand before two governors, and he would stand before a king, King Agrippa II, Herod Agrippa II. When he sees that the trial is not going to be fair, because he understands, right, that they're against them and they're trying all these different things, he appeals to Caesar. Caesar's in Rome. He says, I appeal to Caesar, and he could do that as a Roman citizen. And so what Festus says is, you've appealed to Caesar, then to Caesar you will go. So now he's going to head to Rome. But what we also know is that they could not find any real charges against him. They couldn't find anything of substance. And so they're trying to find something. They're putting him before different governors and a king. And here we go, Acts 26, verse 32 to 27:1. Agrippa, this is Herod Agrippa, the king, said to Festus, this man could have been set free had he not appealed to Caesar. Why? Because he saw nothing worth prosecuting. He shouldn't have been in prison. He says, you could have been set free if you hadn't appealed to Caesar. But he appealed to Caesar, so we go to verse 1. Now, when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to turn Paul and some other prisoners over to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. So Paul knew he was going to Rome. He knew it back in Acts 23 for certain, and it was on his heart all the way back in Acts 19. But here's the thing, Paul didn't know how he was going to get to Rome. In fact, from Romans chapter 15, he expresses in Romans chapter 15 his desire to go to Rome. And the indication that we get there from that scripture is that he was going to go to Rome as a preacher, not a prisoner. As a missionary, not someone who's on a prison ship headed for Rome. There's a change. And that's the first change that Paul's storm brings that we see. He's going to be on a ship transporting prisoners. But here's the deal. This does not represent a change in his mission, but it does represent a change in the method. And that's the thing about storms. They change things. Storms bring changes that we'd rather not have. But here's the deal. The Bible says we go from glory to glory, but it doesn't tell us how we're going to get there. We don't always know the mode of travel, the method, but we do know that we have a mission. We hear from God. We know that ultimately we're going to be the place where he is, because he says, where I am, there you will also be. We understand that we're headed towards glory, but we don't always know what's going to happen on the journey. Storms bring changes to our life. And my first point for you this morning is keep choosing Christ when storms bring change. When storms bring change, keep choosing Christ. And so here's what I want to do. I am going to provide a map for you this morning. I'm going to be kind of like a weatherman a little bit. Half weatherman, half preacher. And we're going to look at his journey on a map. And so we're going to kind of walk that through, because I want you to see what was happening visually so that you can understand what's going on as they head out to sea, as Paul boards one ship and then another ship, and they make this journey across the Mediterranean Sea. And so I'll read the first few verses, and then we'll put the map up there in just a second. It says, we boarded an Adramyttian ship that was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, and put out to sea accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. The next day, we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. From there, we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. When we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed in Myra in Lycia. There, the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy. Okay, let's go to the map. This is the journey. We're only going to really get over to here today, okay? Next week, we'll do that after the storm. But here's what happens. They're over here. They're down here in Caesarea. He boards a ship that's going to go along the coast of Asia. And it says they put out to sea, and then they put in, and they put in at Sidon. Now, here's where they're headed. They're headed over to here. But it says the winds were contrary. And so, I'm sorry, guys. The winds were contrary. And so we used the shelter of Cyprus. So here already the storm's bringing some change. It's not a severe storm yet, but it's bringing some change to their journey. Instead of going straight across, they're coming up here because they're going to get some reprieve from that storm. That's going to block the wind. It was a northeaster. We'll talk about that later. It was coming this way, and so that blocks them off to give them some reprieve from the storm. Then it says that the prisoners, what they do is they end up landing up here, and then they're going to change ships. So they change ships, and now they're going to go onto a grain ship. It's a grain ship that's coming from Alexandria, Egypt. And that ship would not only store cargo of grain that they would take up to Rome, but they would also allow prisoners to go aboard for pay. So they would pay them, transport these folks. We've entrusted them to our centurion. So you got some grain, you have some prisoners going on. And what we understand about this ship, there's some studies that have gone into the size of this ship. It is a large ship that they end up getting on board. There's 276 people that are aboard this ship. The best estimations are it was around 180 feet long, around 50 feet wide or across, 44 feet deep. This is a big ship, especially for that time. So a heavy ship, a large ship. However, it had some disadvantages. It had no rudder. It was controlled by two large oars at the stern or the back of the ship. It had one mast, not multiple, one solid one that was square. And then they had this square sail. It was a very basic ship in terms of what we have in this modern day. And because of that, though it was sturdy, the disadvantage was you couldn't take the wind. And so you had to do some things to navigate the wind. Now, here's what it says. Next, verse 7 to 9. So they're up here, and it says, when we had sailed many days, for a good many days with difficulty, and arrived at Nidus, since the wind did not permit us to go farther, we sailed to the shelter of Crete off Salmon with difficulty, sailing past it, we came to a place called Fair Havens, which was near the city of Lycia. Considerable time had passed. The voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over. Okay. So now they're coming off. It says they have difficulty. They're not able to really get where they want to go. They have difficulty, so they end up landing here in Cnidus. And then it says they're coming down. It says again that they used the shelter of Crete. So this would probably be best if it came a little more that way because the shelter. And then they come around. They're in the storm. It says with difficulty. It took many days, more days than it should have to get there. And then they arrived at this cool place called Fair Havens. Don't you love Fair Havens in a storm? That's a good place to land. So they land in Fair Havens in the storm. And this fast is referring to the Day of Atonement, this one fast day per year that they would have. And this was after the fast. So we believe this is around the time of mid-October. And the storms, the sea gets more and more treacherous during this time. In verse 9, it says, Paul started admonishing them, saying, men, I perceive that this voyage will certainly be with damage and great loss, not only of cargo, of the ship, but also of our lives. So Paul, the preacher, now the prisoner, and he's not giving a prophecy here. He's actually talking about this because Paul had an understanding about rough waters. From 2 Corinthians 11, we know that Paul, before this, had already been shipwrecked 3 times. So he's just like, let's just look at this. This is not good, you guys. We're in this big old ship. All we have is a couple oars. There's not a lot going on this ship. I perceive that there's some difficulty. He says, men, this isn't looking good. This looks like a storm is a brewing. But here's what it says. They took a vote. The centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. Now, the harbor was not suitable for wintering, so the majority reached a decision. Here's what they wanted to do. They take a vote. Okay, so they're over here in Fair Havens, which sounds like a nice little thing. And they say, this is not good for wintering. Let's not stay here all winter. It wasn't like a super popular place. There wasn't a lot going on there. So you know what they want to do in the middle of the winter? They want to go to Phoenix. Isn't Phoenix a nice place to go in the winter? I'd like to spend the winter in Phoenix as well sometimes. No, not that Phoenix, but this is called Phoenix. And so they say, no, we're going to take a vote, majority rules, if we're going to move on or we're going to stay here at Fair Havens. And so they say, let's just get a little bit further. Let's get over to Phoenix. And then what happens as they're on their way to Phoenix? Now it goes like that. Isn't that what the storms of our life often look like? You know, we're like headed one way. We're trying to go to this nice Phoenix place. We want to go from Fair Havens to Phoenix. You know, just hey, I'll make a little quick trip. And the storms of our life, it just starts to get all squiggly. It just starts to get all difficult because the winds get heavy. The winds are in opposition to us. There's great difficulty for our journey. And then it says, when the moderate south wind came up, thinking that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete closer to shore. But before very long, now catch this, a violent wind called Eurykilo rushed down from the land, and when the ship was caught in it and could not head upwind, we gave up, and let ourselves be driven by the wind. The writer of this, Luke, of course, he's a traveling companion with Paul. It's interesting that they would let him travel on this with him, but he is there. He's saying, they're all aboard to Rome. And anyone who experiences a storm in their life knows that the map begins to look like the map of Paul's journey. We had intended to go this way. We thought that it was all going to go just like this or just so. But often when a storm comes, I would say most every time, we end up in a place that we would never be had the storm not come. Had that heavy wind not come, we end up going through waters that we never wanted to navigate. And here's the thing though, what Paul says before they end up heading out into those waters reveals something to us. And that is that those storms come, there are also choices in storms. We can discern things, we can understand things, we can perceive things, and we can say, you know what, maybe it's best that I don't go out to sea right now. In storms, we have choices. Now, they couldn't choose that the terrible storm came. They wouldn't have chosen the terrible storm. That's like storms for us. We wouldn't choose this terrible storm to come. No, I don't want the terrible storm. I don't want anything of the sort. But here's the thing. They could choose, knowing that the storm was happening, whether or not to get aboard that ship. And when a storm is coming in and over your life, when you're in difficulty, when you're in trouble, when you're really going through it, you have a choice as to which ship you are going to board or if you're going to board at all. The storms bring change. Keep choosing Christ. And when the storm comes, we have these opportunities for wisdom. We have these opportunities to say, you know what? I can't control the storm, but I can make the right decision right now. Just that next right thing. You know, I remember the storm of 2020. It's still a bit of a storm, but when it was really raging, early 2020, COVID-19 is going on. And I remember it was like every day there was a new change happening. Something new, some new development. And it just seemed like the winds were getting stronger. The storm was getting heavier. And I'm going, oh, I can't take it anymore. The Lord's like, you're right. Where's your help coming from? So here's what I remember. Ecclesiastes 7:19 says this: wisdom strengthens a wise person more than 10 rulers who are in a city. So if wisdom strengthens wise people more than 10 rulers, and the scripture says that when we ask God for wisdom, he gives it, and he stores up sound wisdom for us, then gosh, I need to know what the wise thing to do is despite the storm. Because sometimes when a storm's going on, we can create additional storms. We can create more storms than there needs to be. But if we choose Christ in the midst of the change, if we ask the Lord, what do you have to say about my way? What do you have to say about what I do right here, right now, today? I'm asking for wisdom right now. Yesterday's gone, tomorrow's not yet. Today I'm in need. And so here's what I did in that storm. When things are happening fast, they're changing rapidly, and I was one of those people who needed to make decisions, particularly for a body of people, I'll tell you what I did. I went to James chapter 3. If I'm going to be strengthened stronger than the rulers of 10 cities, and you have wisdom for me, then God, I want wisdom. So what is wisdom? Well, it's in James chapter 3. The wisdom from above is pure, peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial, free of hypocrisy, and the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. And when a decision came up that was going to be disruptive, that was going to, just stir it up a little bit, I said, that's not the wisdom that God shows me. In fact, it goes before that. In James 3, it talks about wisdom from below, not above. And it says the wisdom from below has all kinds of disorder. That helped guide me in the storm. Okay, I didn't choose this. I wouldn't choose this. People ask about, hey, what was it like to be a pastor in 2020? I say, I would never choose it, but I also would never trade it. Because I found a strengthening from the Lord that I never had before. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want it again. But the reality, that reality is the reality for you and me in the storms that we face presently. Choose Christ in the midst of change. Perhaps this morning, the storms of your life, the present storm, your concern about a potential storm is something you would never choose for yourself. But I want to point you to the opportunity of what you can choose. You can choose Christ right now. You can choose his best for your life right now. And we sang it before. His mercies are new every morning, not just some mornings. Every morning, his mercy is new. That means he can bring it any and every morning. Lord, I need it this morning. God, I need it right now. You didn't choose the storm, but you can choose what you do in the storm. Let me say that again. You didn't choose the storm, but you can choose what you do in the storm. Choose Christ in the midst of the change. The last time my family flew on a plane, we were coming actually from Florida, my mom's house, and we were coming back to Oregon. And I remember going to the reader board, and your favorite one, delayed. Went up to the reader board, okay, flight's supposed to leave at 9 or whatever, delayed. And then it got delayed again, and then delayed again. And someone came up and stood right next to me. They must have been on the same flight. They made it very clear because they looked at it with a few choice words and said, I can't believe it's delayed. Well, I understood something. I understood that the reason why the flight was delayed is because there were tornadoes going all over the southeast. Maybe they want to get us there safely. So I'm good. Just delay away. Do what you have to do, okay? And then not only that, when we got on the plane, they said because of the storms, we need to take a different route. We need to go along the coastline and then straight up. That was going to add an hour and a half to our trip. And some people were just so fired up, but not me. Why? Because I can't read an air map. I can't fly a plane. I couldn't get there on my own. No way, no how. I just trust that they're going to get me there safely. Now, I had inside information that there were some tornadoes going on. With our lives, it doesn't always work out like that. We don't always get the inside or the inside information, but what we can know is that Jesus knows the roadmap and that he's in control of the roadmap and that he's going to get us to where we need to be. And he's going to get us there safely. If it were not so, he would not have told us so. Isaiah 55, 8-9, my thoughts are not your thoughts. My ways are not your ways, declares the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. Do you believe that his thoughts and his ways are higher than yours? Okay, Lord, then when I see a delay on the reader board, I trust you. When I see that the detour is going to take me longer, I trust you. I'm looking to you, Lord. Plans change, but Jesus Christ is the same. And he's working it all for us, and he's working it all for our good. God's ways and thoughts are higher. And so we need to know what he has to say in the storm. We choose Christ in the midst of the change, and we find strength because we're standing on the rock. We're standing on Jesus Christ. The next point for your consideration is focus on him, not the forecast. Focus on him, not the forecast. Here's what we read, verse 14. Before very long, a violent wind called Eurykilo rushed down from the land, and when the ship was caught in the land, the ship was caught in the land and could not head up into the wind. We gave up and let ourselves be driven by the wind. This violent wind came down, was called Eurykilo. It was a violent storm. It was a named storm. Did you know that they name hurricanes before they even happen? Here's how it works. Every year they name the storms. So they have this list of names, and if a tropical storm ends up being more than 39 miles per hour, it gets one of the names that were pre-designated earlier in the year. If it becomes 74 miles per hour, then it becomes a hurricane. And so there's all sorts of named storms, but they don't all touch ground. They don't all touch the U.S. This year, last year, the first to hit in 2022 was Hurricane Ian. And then there was Hurricane Nicole, but they have these different names. And so these named storms, the big ones have a name. Well, this is a big one in Paul's journey, Eurykilo. Now, Ian, okay, if I looked at the list, Ian, that might be a storm that could do something. But there were some other names on the list. Bonnie, for example. Earl, nope. Gaston, Carl, no. Nope. And my mom, she lives down there, and so she has to make the decision when the storms come as to whether she's going to evacuate or not, if she's going to head up north. Now, when they first moved there to Florida, she would evacuate just about every time a storm was coming. Every time she'd get in her car and they'd head up north. Now they're like, we're just going to hunker down. We're just going to hunker down. We'll stay home. It's different down there. But if I heard on the news, on the Weather Channel, that Eurykilo was going to hit, Mom, get out of there. I mean, that's a name. Eurykilo, that's a named storm. Eurykilo is coming. You better get out of there. You better bust out of there and head north. So they have this named storm. It's so strong that as soon as the ship is caught in it, they're unable to go against it. In other words, they're powerless. The ship is powerless in the storm. They gave up and they're driven by the wind. Notice the progression. Verse 4, the winds were contrary. In verse 7, they go into the storm with difficulty. In verse 9, sailing was now dangerous. In verse 14, now it's a violent storm. And in the storms of our life, sometimes they have a progression like that, don't they? Oh, it's just contrary. Now it's becoming difficult. Now it's crazy. And all I can do is just stay on this thing because I'm powerless against this thing. There is nothing that I can do. The ship had no rudder. It had just oars. They pick up the oars. This is the picture. They pick up the oars and they just let the storm go because there's no point in fighting against it. Now, we pick back up and, get my map back here, okay? Let's go back to the weather map. Now it says, running under the shelter of a small island called Clauda. Now that would be it'd actually be more accurate, like right over here, that they would be on that shelter. It's like 23 miles off the coast, so they don't go under it, they actually go over it. They get a little shelter. And here's what it says. It says, running under that shelter, they were able to get the ship's boat under control. And they hoisted it up using supporting cables undergirding the ship, fearing they might run aground on the shallows of Syrtis. Then they let down the sea anchor and let themselves be driven along this way. The next day, we were being violently tossed by the storm, and they began to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Okay. This is what's happening. So the boat that they hoist up, this is like a dinghy boat. It's like one of those life rafts that they tow behind, and they're grabbing that to bring it on there because it might get destroyed if they leave it down there. It says with difficulty, it was probably filled with water. And they hoist it up, and then they get supporting cables and they wrap them around the bottom front of the ship so that it can take a beating, kind of keep everything together. And so they're able to get that under control. And then it says, verse 18, they're being tossed by the storm. They begin to throw their cargo overboard. Why are they on this trip to begin with? To take the cargo from Alexandria to Rome. So the storm's happening. They go, we gotta lose some cargo on this thing. Just start throwing the cargo overboard. Then it says the tackle. That would be like, tables and, anything that they had for like creature comforts. They start throwing those overboard. And here's the thing, the storm changed their values. There's something about the storm that changes your values to what you value most. I don't care about the cargo anymore. I don't care about the tackle anymore. I just want to get home. I just want to get there safely. I just want to make it through. And maybe you're at that place in the storm where you just want to make it through. The cargo's inconsequential. They're no longer focused on turning a profit. They're no longer focused on the money that they would make by getting this ship there. They're just saying, we've got to hold on to our very lives. And there's something about the storm where your values change. You begin to understand what matters most. Just a month ago, we had the ice and snow going on, and I was here. And I didn't really know what was going on out there. And then I got a call from Kathy. She said, "Are you coming home?" I said, "Why? What's going on?" And it's raining ice. I don't drive well in that kind of stuff. And she had wanted me to stop by the store earlier in the day. She said, "Can you stop by the store?" But now we're on the phone. She says, "Are you coming home? Because it's been going for a while." I said, yeah, I'll stop home. And she goes, "No, don't worry about stopping at the store. Just get home. Just get home." Just get home. And maybe that's you today. You're in that storm and you just want to know that you're going to get home. Oh, maybe not to your physical home here, but to home where God is. Hey, it's a mess. Hey, it's bumpy. Hey, it's squiggly. I just want to get to you, Jesus. There's something about the storm that changes your values. I love the words to the song. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. You want to know how you're going to get home? Grace. Grace, grace, God's grace, grace that is greater than all of my sin. Verse 20, since neither sun nor stars appears for many days, no small storm was assailing us. From then on, all hope of being saved was slowly being abandoned. They begin to believe that they're not going to be saved. There's no way out of this. For navigation, they would use the sun and the stars, so they had no idea where they even were. Maybe you're in that place. I have no idea where I am, and I'm losing hope. My hope's abandoned. The forecast was not changing. Things were not clearing up, but Paul speaks up as they're getting ready to give up. Paul's going to speak up. He's going to first give a little personal note, which is kind of comical. But then he's going to give the words of the Lord. And in the storm, we need the words of the Lord. Let's look at Paul's words first. Here's what he says. You love people like this in the storm. I know you do. 21. It says, when many had lost their appetites, Paul then stood among them and said, men, you should have followed my advice and not have set sail from Crete, and thereby spared yourselves this damage and loss. Don't you love that voice in the storm? You should have listened to me. Thanks a lot, Paul. Okay, moving on. But he goes from that word to the word that he received from God. And that's the word that we need to listen to. The words that we receive from the Lord in the storm. Here it is, verse 22. Now I urge you to keep up your courage. For there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night, an angel of God, whom I belong, whom I also serve, came to me saying, do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has graciously granted you all those who are sailing with you. Therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told, but we must run aground on a certain island. He's saying, hey, the ship's not going to be spared. There's going to be damage. There's going to be collateral damage in this storm, but what he says is you're going to make it through. And if you are in Christ and the storm has come upon you, there may be damage. You may run aground, but you're going to make it through. Why? Because Jesus Christ is going to get you through. He is our strong God. He says, keep up your courage. What does that mean? We've looked at that. Take courage, keep up your courage. It means be of good cheer, be cheerful, cheer up, have joy. Why? You're going to make it. Hey, guess what? If nothing else works out in this life and you're in Christ, cheer up. You're going to make it. And sometimes I think about that. Man, I'm having a rough day. I'm like, guess what? I'm going to heaven. If that's all I got on a day, that's a pretty good day. That's a pretty amazing day. That I have the promises of God, and what he says to the people is, I trust God that it will turn out exactly the way he said it would turn out. Do you trust God that it's going to turn out exactly the way that he said it would? Again, we go from glory to glory, but we don't know the ups and downs on the journey. But we trust him with our destination. Your method may have changed. Your mission remains, Paul. He says, you're going to Rome. You're going to Rome, Paul. He says, you're headed to Rome. You're not going to die. You're headed to Rome. Paul, you're not going to die in this storm. You're going to Rome. I already told you that you're going to Rome. He goes, I believe God. I trust God. If you've put your faith and trust in Jesus, yet you find yourself in one of life's storms today, I want to encourage you to cheer up, to be joyful, because this storm is not the end. Your present storm, maybe it's one of the big ones. Maybe you even have a name on it. It's one of those big storms that if you just say, this is the storm I'm going to, we all would go, oh, Well, let me remind you of just who you belong to, because you may have a named storm, but the God you serve has the name above all names. And there's no storm that can conquer him. Blessed is the person whose strength is in you. That blessed, happy. Psalm 28, 7-8, the Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him and I am helped. Therefore my heart triumphs, and with my song I thank him. The Lord is their strength. He is a refuge of salvation for his anointed. Focus on him, not the forecast. You remember Peter. Peter's in the boat. The disciples are in the boat. Jesus says, meet me on the other side. They go into the boat. It's one of our favorite stories. Peter gets into the boat and Jesus is coming on the water and he says, Lord, since it's you, ask me to come. And he says, come, Peter. And Peter gets out of the boat. And what does he begin to do? He begins walking on water. Why? Because his eyes were fixed on Christ. But then it says he saw the wind. And when he saw the wind, he began to sink. Are you looking at the wind, or are you looking at the one who can get you through the wind? Are you fixing your eyes on the forecast or the Father? Are you fixing your eyes on the conditions or Christ? Because only one can give you strength in the storm. The forecast is going to cause us all to falter. But the Father will give us strength. He tells them to take courage. And what they end up doing, the storm rages on, and they start worrying that they're going to hit rocks. So they begin sounding out how deep it is. They would put a weight on a rope, they'd throw it overboard, see how deep it is. It says it was 20 fathoms and then 15 fathoms. A fathom is 6 feet. And so, it's getting more and more shallow. It says they then begin to pray for daybreak, but while they're praying, they take that boat that they brought up into the ship and they put it over to the other side, and there's some folks on the boat that are getting ready to jump. Paul goes to the captain, he says, if they jump in that thing, they're going to die. If they jump in that thing, they're going to die. Why? Because the Lord told Paul, those who are with you, I will grant to save their lives. Now you're going to leave Paul? I mean, he's the one who just called it all out. This leads me to the last point. Don't jump ship when God is in it. When God is in something, don't jump ship from that something. Stay in it. It may be the most severe, toughest storm that you've ever faced in your life. Don't jump ship if God is in it. Now, there's times where we need to jump ship because God's not in it. You remember Jonah? There's a storm that came because he was going in the opposite direction of God's will. But when God is in it and his word confirms that, and you have wise counsel in your life, and you know that, man, this is just really, really tough. Don't jump ship. God is in it. And perhaps you need to hear this morning regarding a situation that you're in, a circumstance that you're in. Stay in it. If God is in it, stay in it. If God is in it, don't jump ship. You can choose Christ despite the change. You can focus on him and not the forecast. And even when the winds get heavy, if he is in it, then he will be faithful in it. Stay faithful to him. He'll be faithful to you. As the story goes, the ship ends up striking a reef and breaking apart. Some swam to the shore and some just grabbed onto fragments from the ship in order to float there because they couldn't swim. But guess what? They all made it to the shore, all 276 of them. Maybe the ship you've been in has already run aground and it's breaking and you're just clamoring for pieces. Trust that God will get you to the place that he said he would get you to. Why? Because he is your strength in the Lord, in the storm. The Lord is your strength in the storm. Paul had 3 anchors in that storm. The anchors on the boat, they weren't working real well. But Paul had 3 anchors. Here's what he says. The angel came to him, the angel of God, and he says, it's God that I belong to. It's God that I serve. And it's God that is also with me. It's God that I belong to. If you're in the storm right now, who do you belong to? You belong to God. If you belong to God, then he's got you. If it's God who you serve, then don't jump ship, stay in it because it's according to his will, not my will. It's thy will, not my will. I serve you, God. Just let me know what you need me to do. And last, if you're in the storm, you've got to know that he's with you. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. He will be in you. He will be with you, in you. He will come upon you. And maybe you need that. You need the power of him in your life right now. Come close to God and he will come close to you. Lastly, Isaiah 40:31. Those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. You want to know the thing about that kind of strength? You want to know the thing about that new strength? It's new strength. That means it's strength you never had before. But when you wait on the Lord, when you trust the Lord, he gives you new strength. And maybe that's you. You're at that place in the storm. You're just trying to make it to shore. Wait on the Lord. He will give new strength. Do you need new strength? I only know one who can give it. And Paul, as people are giving up, as people are throwing in the towel, he says, let's stand on what God said. Let's stand on what the Lord has spoken. And maybe that's you today. You need new strength and you just need to say, Lord, I'm going to walk according to your word and then I'm going to wait. And I'm going to wait, and I'm going to wait, and I'm going to wait. And maybe the waves seem so strong that you don't think you're going to make it. Those who wait on the Lord gain new strength. And so I want to just take a couple of moments as we transition back into worship for you to come before the Lord because maybe you're in a storm this morning and you need new strength. And so I'm just going to encourage you to ask him right here and right now, Lord, will you give me new strength? I'm going to wait upon you. I'm going to come before you. Lord, give me new strength because I cannot do it on my own. But Lord, I do need strength in the storm. And I know that you and you alone can be my strength today.